The evening sun was sinking behind the tall glass towers of the city, and the streets were filled with the usual rush of people heading home. Cars honked, vendors called out, and hurried footsteps echoed against the sidewalks. Among the crowd, a man in a crisp suit walked with his briefcase in hand. His name was Mr. Raymond, a well-known CEO who had built his empire with years of hard work and determination. His day had been filled with endless meetings, numbers, and decisions that would affect hundreds of people working under him. Like every evening, his mind was on the next big plan, the next deal, and the comfort of his luxurious home waiting for him. But on this particular evening, something unusual caught his attention. At the corner of the street, near the steps of a tall office building, stood a small boy with a shoeshine kit. His clothes were old and a little torn, his shoes too big for his feet, and his hair messy as if he had run all day without stopping. The boy looked tired, but his eyes carried a strange mix of determination and desperation. He wasn't calling out loudly like other street workers might. Instead, he stood quietly, waiting for someone to notice him. When Mr. Raymond passed by, the boy suddenly stepped forward. His voice was soft but urgent. "Please, sir, just $10, let me shine your shoes," the boy said, holding up his small wooden box and brush. His words were not just an offer of service, they were more like a plea, almost as if his entire world depended on it. Mr. Raymond stopped in his tracks, surprised. He had passed by countless people on the streets before, vendors, beggars, and workers offering their services. Most of the time, he simply walked on without paying attention. But this boy's voice was different. It trembled slightly, carrying both fear and hope. It wasn't the usual kind of request that felt rehearsed. It was raw, genuine, and straight from the heart. He looked down at the boy. The boy couldn't have been older than 10. His hands, though small, looked rough, as if he had been working for a long time. His cheeks were a little dirty, and his knees had scratches that suggested he ran or fell often. Yet, his eyes shone brightly with something stronger than his frail body and unshakable will. "Why $10? Mr. Raymond asked, his voice calm but curious. He wasn't planning to stop for long. He had a car waiting and calls to make. But for some reason, he needed to know why the boy was so desperate. The boy looked up quickly, almost afraid that the man would leave without listening. "Please, sir, I need it tonight. I can shine your shoes very good, I promise. Just give me a chance." His small hands shook as he clutched the shoeshine brush tightly. Mr. Raymond sighed. His instinct told him to keep walking, to not get pulled into whatever story the child had. But then, something in his own memory stirred. Long ago, when he was young, he too had stood on a street corner, not with a shoeshine kit, but with newspapers in his arms, begging people to buy one so he could help his struggling family. That small memory made him hesitate. He looked around. People were moving fast, not noticing the boy, not caring. Everyone had their own worries, their own destinations. Yet here was this child, standing bravely in the middle of all the indifference, refusing to give up. "All right," Mr. Raymond finally said, placing his briefcase down by his side. "Go on then. Shine my shoes." The boy's face lit up instantly. He quickly placed his box down and gestured for the man to step onto it. His movements were hurried but careful, almost practiced from many such encounters. He pulled out a cloth, a small brush, and a bottle of polish that was nearly empty. As he began working on the CEO's polished black shoes, Mr. Raymond found himself watching him closely. The boy's hands were steady despite his nervousness. Every stroke of the brush was done with focus, as though he was performing the most important task in the world. He wasn't careless. He wasn't rushing to just grab the money and leave. He was giving it everything he had, even though it was just a pair of shoes. The CEO remained silent as the boy worked, but inside his mind, questions kept rising. Why was the boy alone at this hour? Where were his parents? Why did he need exactly $10? The boy's eyes told him there was more to this than just a business of shining shoes. After a few minutes, the shoes shone brightly under the streetlights. The boy carefully wiped them one last time with his cloth, making sure there wasn't a single spot left dull. He then looked up, his face hopeful. "There, sir. I did my best," he said softly. His small chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, as though even this little task had taken all the energy he had left. Mr. Raymond looked at his shoes, then back at the boy. He could have simply handed him a few coins and walked away. That would have been the easy thing to do. But the boy's earlier words, "Please, just $10," echoed in his head. He realized this was not about money alone. There was a story behind it, something that pushed the child to beg in such a humble yet desperate way. "Tell me," the CEO said quietly, bending down slightly so his voice wouldn't sound too sharp. "Why do you need exactly $10? The boy froze. For a moment, his lips pressed together as if he wasn't sure whether to answer. His small fingers twisted the cloth nervously. Then, slowly, his eyes filled with tears he tried hard to hold back. "It's for my mom, sir," he whispered. "She's very sick. The medicine from the shop costs $10. I already have some money, but I'm still short. If I don't get it tonight," his voice broke, and he quickly wiped his face with the back of his hand. Mr. Raymond's chest tightened as he listened. In those few words, he saw a picture clearer than any long explanation could paint: a little boy carrying the burden of saving his mother, fighting the world with nothing but his tiny shoeshine kit and endless courage. The noise of the city seemed to fade for a moment. All Mr. Raymond could hear was the boy's trembling voice and the pounding of his own heart. He knew at that moment that this was not just another evening, not just another stranger on the street. This was the beginning of something that would stay with him forever. The boy's words hung in the air, fragile yet powerful. He kept his eyes low, afraid that the man in front of him might walk away like so many others had. His fingers gripped the edge of the shoeshine box tightly, as though holding on to his last hope. The city lights reflected off the tears in his eyes, making them look brighter than the night around them. Mr. Raymond stayed silent for a long moment, not because he didn't know what to say, but because his mind was searching for the right response. He was a man who had faced boardroom battles, negotiated million-dollar deals, and spoken to crowds without a hint of fear. Yet here he was, at a loss for words in front of a 10-year-old boy. The boy's honesty had struck something deep inside him. "Your mother is sick?" Mr. Raymond finally asked, his voice softer than before. The boy nodded quickly, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir. She hasn't been able to get up from bed. She coughs a lot, and sometimes she can't breathe well. The doctor said she needs medicine, and it costs $10. I have 5. I earned it shining shoes all day. But the shop won't give me the medicine unless I pay the full amount." His voice cracked slightly, but he forced himself to stay steady. Mr. Raymond studied the boy closely. His small shoulders looked too weak to carry such a heavy responsibility, yet here he was, doing everything he could to help his mother. He didn't ask for free money, didn't beg for pity. He offered to work, to polish shoes, even though exhaustion was written all over his face. "What about your father?" Raymond asked gently, though part of him already guessed the answer. The boy hesitated, then shook his head. "It's just me and my mom now. My father, he left a long time ago." The boy didn't go into detail, but the sadness in his eyes was enough to explain more than words ever could. A wave of emotion ran through Raymond. He remembered his own mother, how she had worked tirelessly to raise him when money was scarce. He remembered the pain of watching her skip meals so that he could eat. For a brief second, he saw himself in the boy: the same struggle, the same desperation, the same burning will to protect the person who mattered most. "Do you go to school?" Raymond asked, still watching the boy carefully. The boy nodded. Yes, sir. In the morning. After school, I come here to shine shoes. Sometimes people let me, sometimes they don't. Today, I couldn't get enough customers. That's why I'm short. That's why I begged you. His voice grew softer as if he was ashamed for lowering himself to plead. But Raymond didn't see shame. He saw bravery. A child working after school, carrying responsibilities far beyond his age, wasn't something to look down upon. It was something to admire. Do you know how many pairs of shoes you usually shine in a day? Raymond asked, trying to understand more about the boy's struggle. The boy thought for a moment. Maybe 10, sometimes 15 if I'm lucky. Some people pay me $1. Some give only coins. I save everything for food and for mom's medicines. But some days, people don't stop. They walk past me like I don't exist. Those last words pierced Raymond deeply. He knew what it was like to be invisible once, to be overlooked when he had nothing. Success had given him power, but it had also created distance between him and the struggles of ordinary life. This boy's words brought him back to the ground. Raymond looked at the boy's worn-out shoeshine kit. The wooden box was chipped on the edges, the polish nearly gone, and the cloth ragged from overuse. Yet the boy handled it like it was his most valuable treasure. It was his tool, his weapon, his only way of fighting against life's cruel challenges. Tell me, Raymond said quietly, how old are you? I'm 10, sir, the boy replied. His small chest rose proudly, as though age did not define the size of his courage. Raymond nodded slowly. 10. At that age, most children were busy playing with toys, watching cartoons, or worrying about homework. This boy, however, was counting every coin, bargaining with strangers, and racing against time to keep his mother alive. The CEO's heart grew heavy. His expensive watch ticked on his wrist, reminding him of the passing minutes, but for once, he wasn't in a hurry. The boy's story had pulled him into a world far from glossy office towers and endless wealth. A world where $10 could mean the difference between sickness and survival. The boy noticed the silence and grew anxious. He thought perhaps he had said too much, that maybe the man would walk away like others had before. Quickly, he picked up his brush and said, I can shine your shoes again if you like. I'll do it better this time. Just please, sir, please help me with the $10. His voice broke at the end, and he quickly bit his lip to stop it from trembling. Raymond's throat tightened. He couldn't ignore the desperation anymore. He had seen charity cases before, had donated to organizations and written checks without thinking twice. But this was different. It wasn't numbers on paper. It was a child, standing right in front of him, carrying his world on his small shoulders. He leaned down slightly, trying to meet the boy's eyes. What's your name? The boy looked up, surprised by the question. Daniel, sir, he replied softly. Daniel, Raymond repeated, the name rolling off his tongue as though it was meant to stay in his memory. You've been very brave today. Not many people your age could do what you're doing. Daniel lowered his eyes again, but a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Praise was not something he heard often. He was used to people ignoring him or brushing him off. For someone to call him brave, it felt like warmth spreading in his chest. Raymond took a deep breath. He knew this encounter was no accident. Life had put Daniel in his path for a reason. This boy was teaching him something he had almost forgotten, that true strength wasn't in wealth or power, but in the courage to fight for the people you love, even when the odds are against you. For Daniel, the night was still heavy with uncertainty. Would he go home with the medicine his mother desperately needed, or would he return empty-handed once again? He didn't know. All he knew was that he had tried, and in front of him stood the one person who might decide the answer. Raymond slipped his hand into his pocket, feeling the bills resting inside. It was such a small amount for him, yet it carried the weight of life itself for the boy. He thought about the many times he had spent $10 without even noticing on coffee, on snacks, on things that barely mattered. And now, here was a child whose entire hope for his mother's health depended on the same amount. The city buzzed around them, cars honking and people rushing by, but in that moment, it felt as though the world had paused. A wealthy CEO and a poor shoeshine boy stood in two very different worlds, yet their lives had suddenly intertwined. And neither of them knew that this simple exchange of words would change them forever. The boy's words stayed in Raymond's heart long after they were spoken. Standing there on the busy sidewalk, with Daniel's small hands still holding the cloth and brush, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a tug deep inside, a reminder of where he once came from. For a moment, the tall buildings, the flashing billboards, the roaring traffic all seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the image of the boy polishing his shoes with such care and dignity. Raymond's polished black shoes reflected Daniel's little face. The boy's brows were furrowed in concentration, his lips pressed tightly together as he made sure not a single spot remained dull. He didn't rush, even though his need for money was urgent. He didn't cut corners, even though he was tired and weak. Every stroke of his brush told a story of effort, of determination, of a child who refused to give up no matter how unfair life had been to him. Raymond watched silently, his mind traveling back to a time when he was not a CEO, not a wealthy man, but just another struggling boy. He remembered standing barefoot on hot summer streets, carrying stacks of newspapers. He had shouted until his throat was sore, just to convince strangers to buy one. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes people smiled kindly, but often they walked past as if he were invisible. He remembered his mother too, how she would sit up late into the night sewing clothes for neighbors, her fingers bleeding from the needle, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She had never complained. She had always said, "As long as we keep trying, life will give us a way." Those words had carried him through his darkest days. Looking at Daniel now, he saw the same fire, the same struggle, and the same love driving the boy forward. A strange silence grew between them as the boy worked. Raymond's heart grew heavier with each passing second. Here he was, a man who could sign a check worth thousands without hesitation, watching a child work for a mere $10. The contrast gnawed at him. He had always believed in working hard for success, but he couldn't ignore the fact that some people, like Daniel, were born into battles far harsher than others. Finally, Daniel finished his work. He put down the brush, wiped the last bit of polish with his rag, and leaned back to look at the shoes. They gleamed under the soft light of the street lamp, shining almost like new. He gave a small nod, proud of his work, and looked up at Raymond with hopeful eyes. "There, sir," he said softly. "I tried my best. Please, the $10. I can go get the medicine now." His voice carried relief, but also fear, as if he was bracing himself for rejection. Raymond bent down slightly so he could meet the boy's eyes. For the first time in many years, he felt unsure of himself. He wasn't unsure about giving the money he already knew he would, but unsure about what this moment truly meant for him. He could easily hand the boy the bills and walk away, but something inside told him this was not just a chance meeting. This was a mirror life had placed before him, showing him the boy he once was. "Daniel," he said slowly, "you work hard. You do your job well. Do you know that?" The boy looked startled. Praise was not something he heard often. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Instead, he lowered his gaze and nodded shyly. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," Raymond continued. "I know what it feels like to fight for every small coin. I know what it feels like to carry more weight on your shoulders than you should at your age." His voice softened. "And I know what it feels like to worry about your mother." Daniel's eyes widened, as though someone had just lit a spark inside them. You were like me," he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Raymond smiled faintly. Yes. Maybe not in the same way, but I know the struggle. And I can see your strength, Daniel. You don't give up. That is something many grown men don't even have. The boy's eyes shone, not just with tears but with a quiet pride. No one had ever called him strong before. People usually just pitied him, or ignored him. But here was a man in a fine suit, someone powerful and important, looking at him not with pity, but with respect. It was a feeling Daniel would never forget. As Raymond reached into his pocket for money, his fingers brushed against his wallet. He pulled it out slowly, thinking of how easily he had spent money in his life: dinners at fancy restaurants, luxury cars, expensive watches. None of those purchases had ever made his heart feel the way it did now, knowing that even a small amount could mean everything to this boy. He pulled out more than $10, though he didn't show it right away. He wanted to hear more, to understand more about Daniel before deciding what else he could do. Tell me, he asked gently, when your mother gets better, what do you want to do? What do you dream about, Daniel? The boy blinked in surprise. No one had ever asked him that before. He hesitated, biting his lip, then whispered, I want to study, sir. I want to become a teacher. My mom always says education is the key. She tells me that even if we are poor, learning can open doors. I study hard in school, but sometimes it's hard to focus when I worry about her. Raymond's throat tightened again. He had built his life on education, on learning and growing beyond what life had given him. Hearing the boy speak with such honesty and hope made him feel both proud and sad at the same time. Proud because the boy's dream was pure and noble. Sad because he knew how fragile those dreams could be when weighed down by poverty. He looked at Daniel's shoeshine kit again: the frayed cloth, the empty polish, the cracked wooden box. And yet, the boy treated it with more care than some businessmen treated their companies. It was all he had, and he honored it with his hard work. Raymond sighed, realizing how much he had taken for granted in his own life. He had employees who sometimes complained about small tasks, who didn't give their best even when they had all the tools they needed. And here was Daniel, giving his very soul into every shine, even though the reward was so little. Daniel, Raymond said finally, you've reminded me of something tonight. Something very important. You've reminded me what it means to truly work with your heart. Thank you for that. The boy looked confused, not fully understanding what the man meant, but he smiled politely anyway. All he could think of was his mother waiting at home, and the hope that tonight he would finally bring her the medicine she needed. Raymond straightened up, his decision clear now. He would give the boy more than just $10. But beyond that, he knew he couldn't just walk away and forget him. Daniel had awakened something inside him that he didn't want to lose again. As he held the money in his hand, Raymond realized this wasn't just about helping a boy for one night. This was about changing a life. The city moved on around them, people hurrying, cars rushing, lights flashing, but to Raymond, time had slowed. He saw only Daniel, a reflection of his own past, a reminder of his mother's sacrifice, and a symbol of the courage it took to keep fighting when the world seemed too heavy. And as Daniel stood there, waiting silently, his small hands clutched tightly in front of him, he had no idea that the man in front of him was about to do more than just give him $10. He was about to give him hope. Raymond held the money in his hand, his fingers curling around the folded bills as he looked down at the boy. Daniel stood quietly, almost too polite to ask again, but his eyes were filled with urgency. His mother was waiting. Every second mattered to him. He wasn't thinking about himself, or even the hunger in his own stomach. He was thinking only of the medicine that might help the woman who had given him everything. Raymond took a deep breath. For years, he had been a man who made decisions in seconds, decisions that changed businesses, moved markets, and affected countless lives. Yet this simple moment felt heavier than any deal he had ever signed. He wasn't deciding on numbers, he was deciding on hope. Finally, he reached out and pressed the bills into Daniel's small hand. The boy looked down, expecting to see $10, the exact amount he had begged for. But when he unfolded the money, his eyes widened in shock. It wasn't 10. It was far more than that, enough not just for medicine, but for food, for clothes, maybe even for school supplies. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came out. His hands trembled as he held the bills tightly, afraid that if he loosened his grip, they might disappear like a dream. Tears filled his eyes, but he blinked quickly, trying to hold them back. He wanted to speak, to say thank you, but his throat felt locked. Raymond placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Take it," he said softly. "It's for you and your mother. She needs care, and you shouldn't have to fight alone." The boy finally found his voice, though it shook as he spoke. "Sir, this is too much. I only asked for 10. Raymond smiled faintly. "Sometimes life gives us more than we ask for. And sometimes, people come into our lives to remind us what really matters. Tonight, you reminded me." For Daniel, the words were more valuable than the money itself. All his life, people had looked down on him, treated him as just another poor child on the street. But this man, a stranger in a fine suit, was treating him with respect, with kindness, as though his life truly mattered. It was a feeling that made his small heart swell with warmth. The boy quickly wiped his tears with the back of his hand and whispered, "Thank you, sir. You saved my mom. She will smile again because of you." Raymond felt his throat tighten. He had spent years chasing success, earning wealth, and building his empire, but nothing in all those years compared to the joy of hearing those simple words. To save someone's smile, that was a kind of success no business could ever give. He bent down slightly so his eyes met Daniel's. "Where do you live?" he asked gently. Daniel hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should tell. But there was honesty in the man's eyes, the kind of honesty that calms fear. "Just 2 streets from here, sir. A small apartment above the bakery. My mom can't walk much, so she stays inside. I usually go out to work and then bring back what we need." Raymond nodded. He had expected something like that, but hearing it directly from the boy made it feel real, sharp, and painful. The thought of a sick woman lying in a small room while her young son worked on the streets broke something inside him. "Do you know what hospital your mother visited before?" Raymond asked. "The small clinic nearby," Daniel said quickly. "But they said she needs medicine from the shop. Without it, she keeps getting worse." Raymond thought for a moment, then pulled out his phone. He quickly called someone from his office, his assistant who often arranged his personal matters. In a calm but firm voice, he gave instructions to send a company doctor to Daniel's address that very evening. Daniel stood frozen, unsure what to think. He watched the man make the call, his heart racing. He had never imagined that a stranger, someone so important looking, would go this far for him. When Raymond ended the call, he looked at Daniel and smiled. "It's not just money you need. Your mother needs proper care. Don't worry. Someone will visit tonight to help her. And you," he said, tapping Daniel lightly on the shoulder, "should focus on being a child too, not just a worker. You deserve that." Daniel's lips trembled again, and he couldn't stop the tears this time. They rolled down his cheeks freely, but they weren't only tears of sadness, they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope finally returning after so many dark days. He quickly bent down to pick up his shoeshine kit, but this time, it felt lighter. The wooden box that once represented struggle now felt like a symbol of his strength. And in his pocket, the bills felt like more than money, they felt like a chance, a doorway opening where before there had only been walls. Raymond picked up his briefcase and stood tall again, but something inside him had shifted. For years, he had walked past people like Daniel without a second glance. Tonight, he realized how blind he had been. Wealth had given him comfort, but it had also made him forget the true weight of $10 in someone else's life. As they walked together toward the edge of the street, Daniel kept glancing at him, as if making sure he was real. The man's kindness felt almost too big to believe. "Sir," Daniel finally said, his voice quiet but steady, "one day, I will help people the way you helped me. I don't know how yet, but I will. I promise." Raymond smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't the smile of a CEO or a businessman. It was the smile of a man touched by genuine humanity. "I believe you, Daniel. And when that day comes, remember this: you don't need to be rich to change someone's life. You only need a kind heart." The boy nodded, holding the words close like a treasure. They were words he would carry with him forever. When Raymond's car finally pulled up, the driver stepping out to open the door, Daniel stepped back. He felt almost shy again, unsure how to properly say goodbye to the man who had just changed his life. "Goodbye, sir," he whispered. "And thank you. I'll never forget this night." Raymond gave a small nod, then turned and stepped into his car. But as the vehicle pulled away, he kept looking out the window at the boy standing on the corner, clutching his shoeshine kit and the bills tightly against his chest. That image etched itself into his heart, deeper than any memory of meetings, profits, or awards. For Raymond, this was not charity, it was a reminder of what it meant to be human. And for Daniel, it was not just help, it was a spark of hope, a promise that the world still held kindness, even in its darkest corners. The night grew cooler, and the city lights glowed against the sky. Daniel turned toward home, his steps quicker than before, his heart lighter than it had been in months. He imagined his mother's face when he would hand her the medicine, imagined her smile returning, imagined her voice filled with joy instead of pain. And though he was still just a boy with a shoeshine kit, tonight he felt like someone much greater. He felt like a fighter who had won his battle, and like a son who had finally brought light back to his mother's eyes. The night air was cool as Daniel hurried home, his small feet tapping against the pavement faster than usual. For once, he didn't feel the heavy weight of tiredness pressing down on his body. Instead, he felt a surge of excitement, an energy that carried him forward. In his pocket, the bills were safe, pressed tightly against his hand. Each step brought him closer to his mother, closer to the moment he had been waiting for all day. The street lights flickered as he turned into the narrow lane where he lived. The bakery below their small apartment was already closed, its shutters pulled down, but the faint smell of bread still lingered in the air. Daniel climbed the old staircase 2 steps at a time, his heart beating quickly, not from fear or exhaustion, but from joy. When he pushed open the wooden door, the room was dimly lit by a single lamp. His mother lay on the bed, her thin figure covered by a worn blanket. She turned her head slowly as the door creaked open. Despite the weakness in her body, her eyes softened when she saw him. "You're back, Daniel," she whispered, her voice raspy but warm. "Yes, Mama," he said, rushing to her side. His voice carried both relief and pride. "I got it. I got the money. And not just $10, more than that. You can have your medicine, and food too. You'll get better, Mama. I promise." Her eyes widened, surprise flashing across her face. "More than 10? How, Daniel?" Daniel hesitated for a moment. How could he explain the miracle of meeting a man like Raymond? How could he put into words the kindness that had changed everything? He sat down beside her, holding her hand gently. "A man helped me, Mama. I shined his shoes, and I told him about you. He gave me money, much more than I asked for. And he said he would send someone to help you too, a doctor from his company. He was kind, Mama. Very kind." Tears filled her eyes as she squeezed his hand weakly. "There are still good people in this world," she whispered. "You see, Daniel. I told you never lose hope. That night, for the first time in weeks, Daniel slept without worry. He placed the money safely under his pillow and drifted off to sleep beside his mother, dreaming of brighter days ahead. The next morning, as promised, a doctor arrived at their apartment. He was kind and patient, carefully examining Daniel's mother and providing her with the medicine and care she needed. Over the next few weeks, her health slowly improved. The constant coughing lessened, her strength began to return, and a gentle color came back to her cheeks. Every day after school, Daniel would rush home not just with coins from shining shoes but also with stories about his studies. And every evening, his mother would smile more than the day before. Each smile was a victory for Daniel, proof that his hard work and his courage had not been in vain. Meanwhile, Raymond carried the memory of that night with him. In his office, surrounded by files and screens, he would sometimes pause and see Daniel's face in his mind, the boy's determined eyes, his trembling voice, his tiny hands holding the shoeshine brush. He remembered the way Daniel had said, "Please, just $10. And he remembered how those words had pierced through the walls he had built around himself. One morning, while reviewing company reports, Raymond found himself staring out of the window. The city stretched out below him, busy and loud, filled with countless lives. How many other children were out there, just like Daniel, fighting battles in silence, hoping for a small chance? The thought stayed with him, urging him to do more. That very week, he set up a program within his company to support children from low-income families. It provided school supplies, meals, and health care for those in need. He didn't announce it with big speeches or advertisements, he simply made sure it reached the children quietly, just as kindness had quietly reached Daniel. But of all the children helped, Daniel remained closest to his heart. From time to time, Raymond's assistant would check in on the boy and his mother, ensuring they were safe and cared for. And each time Raymond heard news of Daniel's progress, a smile touched his face, the kind of smile that came not from profit, but from purpose. For Daniel, life began to change slowly but surely. With his mother regaining her health, he could focus more on his studies. He still shined shoes sometimes, not because he had to, but because he wanted to help with small things. Each time he picked up his brush, he remembered the night that everything changed. He remembered the man in the suit who had looked at him not with pity, but with respect. One afternoon, months later, Daniel sat at his small wooden desk, scribbling on a piece of paper. His handwriting was shaky but full of effort. He was writing a letter, one that he poured all his heart into. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and placed it in an envelope. The next day, with a little help from the bakery owner downstairs, he sent it to the tall office building where Raymond worked. A few days later, Raymond found the letter on his desk. It was simple, written in uneven lines, but it carried more weight than any document he had ever signed. "Dear sir, thank you for saving my mom. She smiles again because of you. I will study hard. One day, I will help people like you helped me. From, Daniel." Raymond read the letter several times, his heart warming with every word. He placed it carefully inside a frame and hung it on the wall of his office. Whenever meetings grew stressful or decisions felt overwhelming, he would glance at the letter. And every time, it reminded him of the boy on the street corner, the boy who had taught him that true wealth was not in money, but in kindness. Years later, Daniel grew into a young man. His mother, healthier and stronger, watched proudly as her son graduated from school. Daniel never forgot his promise to help others the way he had once been helped. And though his journey was just beginning, he carried with him the strength of his struggles, the lessons of his hardships, and the memory of the night a stranger's kindness changed everything. As for Raymond, he continued to build his business, but his vision was no longer just about profits. It was about people. He never forgot Daniel's words, and he never stopped believing in the power of small acts of compassion. Two lives that had once been strangers were now forever linked by one simple request: please, just $10. A request born from desperation had blossomed into a bond of hope, kindness, and humanity. And so, in the busy city filled with rushing footsteps and endless noise, the story of a shoeshine boy and a CEO lived on, not in headlines or newspapers, but in the hearts they touched, reminding anyone who heard it that even the smallest act of kindness could change a life forever.